The deafening noise of Oakland traffic diminished to a distant whisper when Steph Curry parked his black BMW beside Mosswood Park, one of the most frequented squares in the city center. His hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel as he observed through the windshield a scene that would make his heart race in a way that no victory on the court, no individual award, no professional achievement had ever managed. On the park's lawn, near a leafy tree, a young black woman wearing a light blouse and brown skirt was kneeling facing an elderly man, carefully bringing small portions of food to his mouth with the tenderness of a daughter feeding an ailing father. What most impresses is when we witness acts of kindness so pure that they make us question everything we thought we knew about true heroism. Tears formed in Steph's eyes as he observed that young woman patiently feeding an elderly man who clearly was too weak to eat alone. There were no cameras, no audience, no recognition. It was just pure humanity, caring for pure humanity with a maternal delicacy that transcended any difference of age, race, or social circumstance. To understand why this simple image in the square touched so deeply the soul of one of the world's greatest athletes, making him stop everything he was doing to completely absorb that moment. We need to go back exactly 3 days in time to an apparently ordinary afternoon that would become extraordinary in ways no one could predict. It was a sunny Thursday in the heart of Oakland, California. The afternoon sun filtered through the dusty windows of old buildings, creating golden patterns that danced on the busy sidewalks. The familiar aroma of grilled hamburgers, crispy French fries, and freshly brewed coffee escaped through the slightly open door of Oakland Eats, a small diner beloved by the local community for more than 20 years. Ava, a 16-year-old black young woman with eyes that shone with a determination rare for her age, cleaned the tables with precise and careful movements that spoke of months of practice and pride in work well done. She wore her favorite outfit, a simple beige cotton blouse and a brown skirt that Rachel Kim had sewn for her with fabric bought on sale, but which looked like it came from an expensive boutique due to the whimsy and love with which it was made. Her hair was pulled back in a simple bun, some rebellious strands escaping around her face, framing features that mixed youth with an early wisdom that comes only to those who learn to be strong very early in life. The rhythmic sound of the damp cloth against the worn formica created a monotonous melody that mixed harmoniously with the constant hum of the frying pan, the soft noise of the coffee machine, and the low conversations of lunch-hour customers. Construction workers with uniforms dirty from honest sweat, secretaries taking advantage of a quick break, retired elderly people who came more for human company than for food. You can perceive that some places carry a special energy, where life stories intertwine with the smell of homemade food and hard-worked dreams, creating a rich tapestry of human experiences. Ava worked there every afternoon after school, not by choice or extra money for teenage spending, but out of pure necessity. Her grandmother, Rachel Kim, a 72-year-old lady who had raised her alone after Ava's parents died in a car accident when she was only 4 years old, depended on those $70 weekly to supplement the limited retirement income. Rachel had worked as a cleaner in offices for 40 years, getting up at 4 in the morning, taking 2 buses to cross the city, cleaning corporate buildings where executives earned in one day what she earned in a month. Her hands were marked by decades of abrasive chemicals and hard work, but they never ceased to be gentle when they caressed Ava's face before she left for school every morning. "Ava, dear, can you take this tray to table 3? Michelle Carter, the generous-hearted manager who treated Ava more like a daughter than an employee, indicated with her head an elderly couple patiently waiting for their order. Michelle knew Ava's story, knew about the financial difficulties, and frequently forgot to deduct meals that Ava took home, or let her keep tips that theoretically should be divided. "Of course, Mrs. Carter," Ava responded, her genuine smile illuminating not only her own face, but the entire environment around her, even after 6 straight hours of work that would leave any adult exhausted. The brown skirt swayed gently as she moved between the tables, and Rachel always said that color matched perfectly with Ava's golden skin. "Small acts of love create infinite waves of hope," a phrase that Rachel always repeated like a mantra, inherited from her own mother, who in turn had learned from generations of women who found strength in adversity. This phrase echoed in Ava's mind as she served each customer with the same care and attention she would dedicate to her own family, transforming simple commercial transactions into moments of genuine human connection. During her 15-minute break, a luxury that Michelle insisted she take even on the busiest days, Ava used to walk to the window that faced Mosswood Park, the public square that was across the street. It was a place where community life unfolded naturally. Children playing on swings, mothers pushing baby carriages, young people playing basketball on the improvised court, and elderly people sitting on benches watching the movement. But that day, something different captured her attention in a way she couldn't explain, as if the universe were whispering that something important was about to happen. Near a large tree in the center of the square, sitting directly on the grass, there was an elderly man who seemed to carry the weight of the world on his hunched shoulders. His completely white hair was disheveled by the constant wind that blew between the buildings. His worn clothes told silent stories of cold nights sleeping in the open, and his movements were slow and tremulous, as if even the act of staying seated required considerable effort. Benjamin Lewis. Although Ava didn't yet know his name, nor his story of honorable military service, nor the cruel circumstances that had led him to that square, seemed to be in a state of extreme weakness. His hands trembled constantly, not just from cold, but from malnutrition and advanced age. Beside him, a crumpled paper cup contained some coins, perhaps enough to buy a cup of coffee, but certainly not enough for a decent meal. What most impresses is how our society manages to make invisible people, who should be honored for their sacrifices, transforming war heroes into urban ghosts that people pass by pretending not to see. Ava observed for several minutes, while dozens of people passed by Benjamin in the square. Some consciously averted their gaze, accelerating their pace as if extreme poverty were contagious. Others pretended to be completely absorbed in phone conversations or text messages, creating invisible bubbles of indifference around themselves. A few, moved by momentary guilt or genuine compassion, deposited coins in the paper cup without establishing eye contact, maintaining the safe distance that allowed charity without the discomfort of humanization. But it was when a group of 4 teenagers, boys Ava's age, wearing brand-name clothes that cost more than she earned in a month, approached Benjamin in the square that something inside Ava ignited like a sudden and powerful flame. "Man, how disgusting! Why don't they get a job?" One of the boys commented loud enough for Benjamin to hear clearly, his voice loaded with cruel disdain that revealed complete lack of understanding about life's complexities. "I bet it's just laziness," another added, laughing in a way that made Ava's stomach turn. "My dad always says that whoever wants to work, works." "Look at the state of the guy," a third contributed, taking a photo with his cell phone as if Benjamin were a tourist attraction. "I'm going to post on Instagram. A Motivation Monday. See what happens when you don't try hard in life." Benjamin tried to shrink even more, his hands trembling with more intensity as he tried to make himself invisible. But his movements were so slow and laborious that it was obvious to any attentive observer that he was dealing with something far beyond simple homelessness. He was clearly debilitated by age, possibly sick, certainly malnourished for a long time. Silent tears rolled down his aged face, carrying decades of lost dignity and shattered hopes. The casual cruelty of those privileged young people was just another drop in an ocean of humiliation he faced every day. How many times in life do we witness moments that define exactly who we are in the depths of our hearts, that reveal our true nature when no one is looking, and no one will reward us for doing right? It was in that precise instant that Ava felt something awaken within her, a force she didn't know she possessed, a purpose that completely transcended her own difficult financial situation, a moral indignation that demanded immediate action. It was as if an inner voice screamed that standing still observing injustice was silent complicity with cruelty. She looked at the lunchbox she had brought from home for dinner: white rice seasoned with garlic and onion, black beans slowly cooked with pieces of bacon that Rachel had managed to buy on sale, and a small but flavorful piece of roasted chicken that her grandmother had prepared at dawn with all the love that limited resources allowed. It was a simple meal, but nutritious, and made with care. Probably the only complete meal Ava would have that day. The sound of the plastic lunchbox being opened echoed like a silent declaration of war against human indifference, a decision made in the heart before the mind could completely process the implications. "Mrs. Carter," Ava called, her voice loaded with a determination that surprised even herself. "Can I go out for 15 minutes? There's something in the square I need to do. Something very important." Michelle Carter looked into Ava's eyes and saw something she immediately recognized. The same flame that had once burned in her own heart when she was young and still firmly believed she could change the world. One person at a time, before life taught her about limitations and pragmatism. "Go, dear," Michelle said, her voice soft but firm. "Do what your heart is telling you. Sometimes, the only thing truly wrong is not acting when we know we should." How is it possible that a decision of a few seconds has the power to alter the course of multiple lives in ways we could never imagine? Naturally, this leads us to the exact moment when a 16-year-old young woman, wearing a beige blouse and brown skirt made with love, by her grandmother carrying a lunchbox that represented her only meal of the day, made a decision that would change not only her own life trajectory, but create waves of transformation that would reach places and people she could never imagine. Small acts of love create infinite waves of hope, and sometimes these waves grow exponentially until they become tsunamis of change that transform hearts, communities, and eventually the entire world. Ava left the diner, crossed the busy street, entered Mosswood Park, and walked determinedly toward the tree where Benjamin was sitting, not knowing she was about to initiate a journey that would shock not only Oakland, not only California, but all of America and beyond. The soft sound of Ava's worn sneakers against the slightly damp grass of the square echoed like a melody of hope, cutting through the distant urban noise. Each step she took toward the tree where Benjamin Lewis was sitting carried decades of Rachel Kim's teachings about compassion, dignity, and the responsibility we all have for each other. The gentle afternoon wind blew through the leaves of the leafy tree, bringing with it the mixed aroma of freshly cut grass, wildflowers that grew on the edges of the square, and that indefinable fragrance that only urban green spaces possess, a comforting mixture of nature resisting amid concrete. Ava's brown skirt swayed gently as she approached, the lunchbox held firmly in her hands as if it were a precious treasure. Benjamin raised his eyes when the young woman's shadow fell over him, instinctively expecting more expression of disdain, condescending pity, or at best, some coins thrown quickly from a distance. But what he saw was something he hadn't witnessed in years, perhaps decades. Eyes full of genuine compassion, without judgment, without fear, without that calculated distance that people maintain when interacting with society's invisibles. "Excuse me, sir," Ava said softly, kneeling on the grass, beside him to be exactly at Benjamin's eye level, a gesture that spoke volumes about her character and upbringing. Her brown skirt spread around her like a small tent, creating an intimate and protected space. "I brought something for you. If you permit me, I would like to share my meal." The aroma of homemade food, white rice seasoned with golden garlic and onion sautéed to perfect translucency, black beans slowly cooked with bay leaves, and pieces of smoked bacon, roasted chicken with a golden crust that Rachel had managed to create even with an old and temperamental oven, filled the air between them like an invisible bridge connecting two souls of different generations, ethnicities, and life experiences. Benjamin felt tears form in his tired eyes, not only from the hunger that had tormented his stomach for more than 2 days, but mainly from the extraordinary dignity with which he was being treated. When was the last time someone had knelt to speak with him as an equal? When was the last time someone had offered food without demanding anything in return, without asking invasive questions, without moralizing speeches? How is it possible that such an apparently simple gesture has the power to instantly restore the lost humanity of someone society had systematically dehumanized? "Young lady, Benjamin began, his voice hoarse and weak, betraying not only decades of wounded pride, but also real physical debility. His hands trembled violently when he tried to extend them toward the food, and it became clear to Ava that he didn't have enough strength to hold utensils, or even small portions of food. "I don't know if I can... my hands..." Ava understood immediately. Without hesitation or embarrassment, she carefully took a small amount of rice with the plastic fork she had brought. "Don't worry," she said with that early wisdom that some young people develop when they grow up facing real difficulties. "I can help you. My grandmother always says that caring for each other is what makes us human." With delicate and respectful movements, like a daughter feeding an ailing father, Ava brought the fork to Benjamin's mouth. He opened his mouth slowly, his eyes filling with tears of gratitude as he savored the first real food he had tasted in days. You can perceive that sometimes life's most sacred moments happen in the simplest places, between people society has taught to ignore each other. While Ava continued feeding Benjamin patiently, one small portion at a time, she positioned herself comfortably on her knees on the grass, her legs folded under the brown skirt, facing him. It was a position that allowed constant eye contact, that transmitted respect and equality, that transformed the act of feeding into a ritual of genuine care. What most impresses is how two people from apparently such different worlds can find immediate and deep connection through the universal language of kindness, creating bridges that cross abysses of class, age, and experience. "What is your name?" Ava asked gently, while preparing another forkful, observing how Benjamin's posture changed subtly with each bite. A slow but perceptible dignity, returning to his face marked by suffering. "Benjamin Lewis," he answered after swallowing carefully, his voice a little stronger now. "And you, angel of mercy, because you were surely sent from heaven to a forgotten old soldier." Ava laughed, a crystalline and musical sound that made Benjamin smile for the first time. In months, transforming his aged and suffering-marked face into something that reminded one of the proud young soldier he had been decades ago. "Ava," she said simply, continuing to feed him with maternal care. "And I'm no angel, just a girl who firmly believes that good people deserve good things, regardless of their current circumstances." It was then that Benjamin began to tell his story, not all at once, because pain accumulated over decades cannot be poured out in a single conversation, but in precious fragments carefully shared while Ava continued the delicate process of feeding him, one small portion at a time. Benjamin had served his country with honor during the Gulf War, spending 12 years in the Army before returning home, carrying invisible wounds that the health system of the time couldn't adequately understand. Post-traumatic stress disorder, severe anxiety episodes, nightmares that left him screaming in terror in the middle of the night, panic attacks that prevented him from maintaining stable jobs. But in recent years, physical health problems had added to the psychological trauma. Severe arthritis that made simple movements torture, uncontrolled diabetes from lack of access to regular medical care, and a general weakness that came from the toxic combination of advanced age, chronic malnutrition, and prolonged exposure to the elements. It's impossible not to feel indignation when we realize that sometimes the truest heroes are exactly those society systematically chooses to forget, transforming into urban ghosts people who risked their lives defending the values we say we cherish. During the following week, something genuinely magical began to happen in Mosswood Park. Every day at 5 o'clock sharp, when Ava finished her shift at the diner, she crossed the street carrying a lunchbox carefully prepared not only by her, but by Rachel Kim herself, who had vehemently insisted on contributing when she learned of her granddaughter's extraordinary initiative. "If my Ava saw goodness and dignity in this man, then he deserves our kindness and respect too," Rachel had declared with that gentle firmness that characterized women of her generation, adding extra portions when possible and special seasonings that transformed simple ingredients into memorable meals. Besides, feeding the hungry is one of humanity's oldest commandments. The daily ritual had become a delicate dance of care and respect. Ava would arrive at the square, greet Benjamin with genuine joy, kneel on the grass in her characteristic position, on her knees, brown skirt spread around, facing him, and begin the careful process of feeding him. Small acts of love create infinite waves of hope, and this phrase gained new meaning each afternoon when Ava saw Benjamin slowly transforming before her eyes. He began to groom himself better in the morning, combing his white hair with his fingers, washing his face at the square's fountain, organizing his few belongings with the care of someone who had rediscovered self-esteem. His eyes recovered a brightness that had been lost for years of hopelessness. More importantly, his movements became slightly less laborious. Regular nutrition was making a difference, but it was more than that. It was the indescribable feeling of being seen as a human being, of mattering to someone, of having intrinsic value regardless of material circumstances. Other park frequenters began to notice the extraordinary daily routine that unfolded under the tree. Tyler Brooks, a young black entrepreneur who frequently passed through the park during his morning run, observed discreetly with growing curiosity and admiration, often slowing his pace to watch those moments of pure human connection. Diana Thompson, an African-American nurse who crossed the square every day on her way to the hospital where she worked the night shift, began taking a slightly longer route just to witness that daily demonstration that kindness still existed in a world that frequently seemed to have lost compassion. But not all community reactions were positive or understanding. "That girl is unnecessarily putting herself at risk," commented Andrea Hall, A mother who took her children to play in the square? You never know what these people might do, and it's unsanitary, too. She should be studying or working more, not wasting time with vagrants, added Samantha Davis, watching with disapproval from the sidewalk. Do her parents know what she's doing? What if other children start imitating? We'll have beggars in every square expecting to be fed, contributed Jessica Chen, worried about the dangerous precedent that Ava was establishing. The criticisms reached Ava's sensitive ears through malicious whispers, looks of disapproval when she crossed the square, and acid comments disguised as concern for her well-being. But something had awakened within her that was infinitely stronger than any social pressure. An unshakable moral conviction that doing right is rarely easy, but always necessary. One particularly hot afternoon, while Ava fed Benjamin under the generous shade of the tree, he looked directly into her eyes with an emotional intensity that made her heart race. "You know, young Ava," he said, his voice choked with genuine emotion, "I had completely lost faith in humanity. I sincerely thought that kindness was a thing of the past, that people like you were just characters from movies or books. You showed me that there is still genuine light in this world, that there are still angels walking among us. How is it possible to explain the overwhelming impact when we realize that our seemingly insignificant small gestures can literally save someone's soul, restore hope where there was only despair, create light where there was only darkness? But life has cruel and unpredictable ways of testing our determination and moral conviction exactly at the moments when we begin to believe we are truly making significant difference in the world." On Friday of that week, while Ava was preparing for another afternoon of caring for Benjamin, her cell phone vibrated with a call that would make her entire world shake like an emotional earthquake. Rachel Kim had fainted at home while trying to clean the bathroom and was being taken by ambulance to the hospital. The immense medical costs that would come, the work days lost while caring for her grandmother, the terrifying uncertainty about both, their futures, the real possibility of losing the only family she had, all of this fell upon the shoulders of a 16-year-old girl like a crushing weight that threatened to break even her determined spirit. Naturally, this leads us to the crucial moment when Ava would be forced to choose between her own desperate needs and the sacred commitment she had assumed with Benjamin, who now depended not only on her daily food, but on her comforting presence to keep alive the hope that humanity still existed in this world. Small acts of love create infinite waves of hope. But sometimes, keeping those waves in motion requires sacrifices that test the absolute limits of the human heart and reveal what we are really made of when no one is looking, and no one will reward us for doing right. And it was exactly in this moment of greatest personal difficulty and emotional vulnerability that something absolutely extraordinary was about to happen in the square. Something that would transform not only Ava and Benjamin's lives, but eventually touch and inspire millions of people around the entire world. The echo of Ava's hurried steps through the cold corridors of Oakland General Hospital still reverberated in her ears when she finally reached the room where Rachel Kim was hospitalized. Her grandmother seemed so small and fragile in the hospital bed, connected to monitors that emitted constant beeps, like a cruel reminder of how precious and delicate human life is. Rachel's gray hair was spread on the white pillow, and her hands, those same hands that had cared for Ava for 12 years, that had worked tirelessly to raise an orphaned granddaughter, seemed translucent under the merciless fluorescent light. "Grandma," Ava whispered, delicately holding Rachel's hand, feeling how it was cold and fragile like tissue paper. Rachel opened her eyes slowly, and even in her debilitated condition, her first thought was not about her own pain or fear, but about her granddaughter. "Ava, my dear, are you okay? You shouldn't be here. You should be working." "Don't worry about that now," Ava responded, her voice choked with emotion that she tried to control so as not to worry her grandmother even more. "The important thing is that you get well." But behind the brave facade, Ava's mind was racing like a panicked machine. Dr. Robert Kim, the responsible physician, had been direct about the situation. Rachel would need to stay hospitalized for at least a week for observation, followed by several weeks of recovery at home. The medical costs, even with the limited insurance they could afford, would be devastating for their already tight budget. You can perceive that sometimes life puts us in situations where our moral strength is tested exactly when we feel most vulnerable. Worse still, Ava would have to miss work during the next few days to care for Rachel, which meant losing the $70 weekly they desperately depended on. Michelle Carter had been understanding, guaranteeing that Ava's job would be secure. But the cruel mathematical reality remained. Without money coming in, and with enormous medical expenses, they would face financial difficulties that could last months. As Ava left the hospital that afternoon, after spending hours beside Rachel, one question tormented her mind. What to do about Benjamin? She had promised herself she would be in the square every day at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. For him, that meal wasn't just physical nourishment. It was embodied hope, daily proof that he still mattered to someone in this world. How is it possible to choose between two people who depend on you when you can barely take care of yourself? During the following 3 days, while Rachel remained in the hospital, Ava developed a routine that tested the limits of her physical and emotional resistance. She woke up at 5 in the morning, prepared a simple lunchbox with what still remained in the almost empty pantry, went to school, ran to the hospital during lunch hour to see Rachel, returned for afternoon classes, and then walked to Mosswood Park. What most impresses is how some people find strength to continue giving when they seem to have nothing more to offer. Each afternoon in the square became more challenging. Ava arrived exhausted, frequently with only a small portion of food she had managed to gather, sometimes dividing her own school meal to guarantee that Benjamin had something to eat. Her beige blouse was beginning to show signs of wear, and the brown skirt that Rachel had sewn with so much care needed more frequent washing. But Ava had neither time nor energy for basic self-care. Benjamin, despite his physical debility, was not blind to the sacrifice Ava was making. "Young Ava," he said one afternoon, while she fed him with slower movements than usual, clearly exhausted. "You don't need to continue coming here. I can see that you're going through difficulties." "No," Ava responded firmly, kneeling on the grass in her characteristic position, the brown skirt spreading around her. "Some promises are more important than personal convenience. You will be here, and I will be here." Small acts of love create infinite waves of hope. And in that moment, keeping that wave alive was more important to Ava than her own comfort or financial security. It was on a Friday, exactly 1 week after Rachel's hospitalization, that everything changed in a way neither of them could have predicted. Ava had spent the morning at the hospital, where she received the good news that Rachel could be discharged the next day, but also the bad news about the final medical bill, almost $3,000, even after insurance. It was an astronomical amount for them, equivalent to almost a year of Ava's work at the diner. When she arrived at school that afternoon, Ava discovered she had missed an important math test due to her absences. Her teacher, although understanding about the family situation, explained that Ava would have to do extra work to compensate for the lost grades, which would mean even less available time to work and earn money. It's impossible not to feel the crushing weight when we realize that sometimes life overwhelms us in such a way that doing right seems impossible. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Ava arrived at Mosswood Park carrying a lunchbox that contained only white rice and some small pieces of chicken, all she had managed to prepare with the remaining ingredients at home. Her savings were practically zeroed out. She had lost 4 days of work, and the brutal reality was that she would probably need to stop feeding Benjamin to be able to deal with her own family needs. Benjamin was sitting in his usual position under the tree, but seemed even more fragile than before. The irregular week of feeding had taken its toll, and his movements were even more laborious. When he saw Ava approaching, his eyes lit up with that genuine joy that had become the highlight of his days. "My young friend," he said with a weaker voice than usual, "how is your grandmother?" Ava knelt on the grass, positioning herself facing Benjamin as she always did, her brown skirt spreading around her like a small protective tent. "She's better," she responded, beginning to prepare the small portion of food. "She's being discharged tomorrow." But Benjamin, even in his debilitated condition, perceived something different in Ava's energy. "And you? How are you, dear?" For a moment, Ava's brave facade almost crumbled. Tears formed in her eyes while she brought the first fork of rice to Benjamin's mouth. I'm dealing with some difficulties," she admitted. "But that's not important now. The important thing is that you eat." It was at this exact moment, Ava kneeling on the grass of Mosswood Park, wearing her beige blouse and brown skirt, carefully feeding Benjamin directly in the mouth, while silent tears rolled down her face, that Steph Curry parked his BMW across the street. Steph had just left a meeting with Robert Kim, coordinator of a community project he financed, and was driving back home when something in the square captured his peripheral attention. Instinctively, he slowed down, then stopped completely, unable to look away from that extraordinary scene unfolding before him. Naturally, this leads us to the moment when one of the world's most famous athletes would witness an act of kindness so pure that it would forever change his understanding of what true heroism means. Through the windshield, Steph observed a young black woman patiently feeding an elderly man who clearly didn't have strength to eat alone. But it wasn't just the act itself that touched him deeply. It was the way she did it. With absolute dignity, without haste, without condescension, as if she were caring for a beloved family member. Steph turned off the engine and got out of the car slowly, walking to the fence that surrounded the square to observe more closely. What he saw made his heart race in a way no victory on court had ever managed. Ava was genuinely crying while feeding Benjamin, but didn't stop. Each forkful was offered with the same care, each moment of patience when Benjamin needed extra time to chew and swallow. It was obvious to any observer that the young woman was going through her own enormous difficulties, but even so, chose to put a stranger's needs above her own comfort. How is it possible to explain the emotional impact of witnessing true sacrifice in a world where most people only think of themselves? Steph felt tears form in his own eyes. In his entire career of successes and achievements, amid all the adulation and recognition he received daily, he had never witnessed something as genuinely heroic as that young woman in a brown skirt feeding an elderly man forgotten by society. For 15 minutes, Steph remained motionless, watching that silent demonstration of unconditional love. He saw how Ava gently cleaned Benjamin's face when necessary, how she smiled through tears to reassure him, how she made sure he drank enough water to help with digestion. When the lunchbox finally emptied, Steph saw Ava hug Benjamin softly before standing up. It was then that he made a decision that would change not only their own lives, but inspire millions of people around the world. Small acts of love create infinite waves of hope, and sometimes, when these waves find the right person at the right moment, they transform into tsunamis of change that reach every corner of the planet. Steph Curry began walking toward the tree where Ava was saying goodbye to Benjamin, not knowing he was about to become part of a story that would define the true meaning of human greatness. Steph Curry's steps on the grass of Mosswood Park were silent, but each one carried the weight of a decision that would change multiple lives forever. Ava was putting the empty lunchbox in her worn school bag when she heard a soft voice behind her. "Excuse me." She turned around, still kneeling on the grass beside Benjamin, and took a few seconds to completely process what she was seeing. There, standing a few meters from her, was Steph Curry. Not just the most famous basketball player in the Bay Area, but one of the most recognized athletes in the entire world. I saw you two here," Steph continued, his voice loaded with genuine emotion that made both Ava and Benjamin realize this was not a casual encounter or photo opportunity. "May I join you for a moment?" Benjamin looked at Steph with a mixture of confusion and slow recognition. You are Steph Curry," he murmured, his voice weak but full of admiration. "I am, sir," Steph responded, kneeling on the grass to be at the height of both, a gesture that echoed the dignity Ava always demonstrated. "But right now, I'm just someone who just witnessed something that touched me more deeply than anything I've ever seen in my life. You can perceive that moments like this completely redefine our understanding of what it really means to be great in this world." Ava felt tears form again in her eyes, not of sadness, but of a complex emotion that mixed surprise, shame for having been seen in a moment of vulnerability, and something she couldn't completely define. "I wasn't trying to impress anyone," she said quickly, as if she needed to explain herself. He needs help, and I can help, so—" "I know," Steph interrupted gently. "That's exactly why I'm here. Because you did this without expecting anything in return. Without an audience. Without recognition. You did it because it was the right thing to do." Steph took his cell phone from his pocket and, for a moment, Ava feared he was going to take a photo to post on social media, transforming her private moment of care into viral content. But instead, he opened his banking app. "What is your full name?" he asked Ava. "Ava. Ava Johnson," she responded hesitantly, still processing the surreal nature of the situation. "And you, sir?" Steph asked Benjamin. "Benjamin Lewis, young man," Benjamin responded, his voice gaining strength in the presence of the kindness that radiated from the famous athlete. "What most impresses is how true greatness recognizes true greatness, regardless of fame, money, or social status." Steph typed quickly on his phone, then looked directly into Ava's eyes. "Ava, I just transferred enough money to cover all your grandmother's medical expenses. And I established a fund that will guarantee you never again have to choose between helping someone and caring for your family." The silence that followed was deep as an ocean. Ava looked at Steph as if he had just spoken in a foreign language, unable to process the magnitude of what she had just heard. "This can't be real," she whispered. "It's very real," Steph said, smiling through his own tears. "But this is just the beginning." He turned to Benjamin, whose expression had changed from confusion to a cautious hope he didn't dare feel for years. "Mr. Lewis, if you permit me, I would like to help you too. I have contacts in the Veterans Department, and I know there are programs that can offer permanent housing and medical care for someone with your service history." Benjamin began to cry, not the silent tears of pain that Ava had seen before, but tears of relief, gratitude, and an emotion so pure it made Steph's heart race even more. How is it possible to explain the moment when we witness the exact instant that lost hope returns to life in someone? "Why?" Ava asked, her voice choked. "Why would you do this for us? You don't even know us." Steph looked at the young woman kneeling on the grass, wearing her beige blouse and brown skirt, who had just taught him more about character in 15 minutes than years of professional success. "Because you reminded me of what really matters," he said simply. "Ava, you fed this man when you yourself were hungry. You cared for him when your own family was in crisis. This isn't just kindness. This is heroism in its purest state. Small acts of love create infinite waves of hope. And in that moment, Steph understood he had been touched by waves that originated from a source much more powerful than fame or money. "But there's one condition," Steph continued, his expression becoming more serious. "I want to tell your story. I want the world to know that true heroes don't wear sports uniforms or appear on television. True heroes kneel on the grass of public squares and feed people society has forgotten." 3 days later, Steph Curry posted a video on his social networks that would change everything. The video showed Steph sitting in his house, speaking directly to the camera with raw emotion his fans had rarely seen. He told the complete story: Ava working to support her grandmother, discovering Benjamin in the square, establishing a daily routine of care, continuing to feed him even when her own family faced medical crisis. "I thought I knew what greatness meant," Steph said in the video, his voice choked. "I thought titles and trophies defined heroism. But a 16-year-old young woman showed me that real heroism is kneeling on the ground of a square and feeding someone when you yourself are hungry." The video became viral in a matter of hours. It's impossible not to feel the impact when a story of genuine kindness touches the hearts of millions of people simultaneously, reminding humanity that there are still reasons to have hope. In 24 hours, Ava and Benjamin was among the worldwide trending topics. Donations arrived from every corner of the planet. Not just money, but job offers for Ava, housing proposals for Benjamin, and hundreds of stories from people inspired to make their own differences in their communities. Rachel Kim, watching the news from her hospital bed, cried tears of pride while seeing her granddaughter being interviewed by national television networks. "I always knew she was special," she told the nurses, "but I never imagined the whole world would discover this too." Tyler Brooks, the young entrepreneur who had observed the daily interactions in the square, decided to establish a permanent foundation to feed homeless people in Oakland. Diana Thompson, the nurse, organized a hospital program to treat veterans in vulnerable situations. But perhaps the most profound impact was in schools around the country, where teachers began telling Ava's story as an example that age is never an impediment to making real difference in the world. 6 months later, on a sunny afternoon in the same Mosswood Park, a very different scene unfolded under the same tree. Benjamin Lewis, now living in a subsidized apartment for veterans and receiving regular medical care, was sitting on a new bench the city had installed. His hair was clean and combed, his clothes were new and appropriate, and his eyes shone with a vitality no one had seen in decades. Ava, now beneficiary of a full scholarship and young ambassador of a national foundation against hunger, still visited Benjamin regularly, no longer to feed him, since he had recovered strength and independence, but because the friendship that had been born from those moments of care had become one of the most precious treasures of their lives. Naturally, this leads us to the moment when we understand that some stories have no end, only continuous transformations that echo through time. Steph Curry was also in the square that afternoon, not as a celebrity doing charity, but as a genuine friend who had learned that receiving inspiration is even more valuable than offering it. "Do you know what you did, don't you?" he asked, sitting on the grass beside the bench where Benjamin was. "Us?" Ava laughed, kneeling on the grass as she always did, her new skirt, still brown because some traditions are sacred, spreading around her. "You're the one who changed our lives." "No," Steph said, shaking his head with absolute conviction. "You changed my life, and then changed the lives of millions of people who saw that kindness still exists, that caring for each other still matters, that small acts of love can literally transform the world." Benjamin, whose voice was now strong and clear, said something that would be engraved in the hearts of everyone present. "You know, I used to think I had lost everything in life, but now I realize I was just waiting to find you two. Sometimes, losing everything is the only way to discover what really matters. Small acts of love create infinite waves of hope, and sometimes, when these waves find the right hearts at the right moment, they transform into tsunamis of change that remind the entire world that humanity is still capable of extraordinary things." How is it possible to measure the impact of a young woman who knelt in a square to feed an elderly man? Impossible. But we can see it in each person who decided to help a stranger after hearing this story, in each child who learned that heroism doesn't require superpowers, in each heart that rediscovered that kindness is the most powerful force in the universe. This is a story about hunger and food, but it's mainly a story about how unconditional love can save not only individual lives, but the collective soul of a society that sometimes forgets what it's capable of when its best instincts are awakened. And perhaps that's the most beautiful truth of all. We don't need power or fame to change the world. We just need courage to kneel when someone needs care, to share when someone is hungry, to see humanity where others see invisibility. Because in the end, true heroes are not those who conquer stadiums. They are those who conquer hearts, one shared meal at a time.